Hello, everyone. This is Professor Spears, and this is another wonderful episode of Human Services in Northwest Indiana. And I'm very fortunate to have back for our third and final episode, at least for right now, of addiction uh, concentrated topics. We've had a general episode. We our last episode was about micro level exploration of addiction, and now as our final episode, we're going to look at a more macro level approach, which means we're going to be like looking from up above and examining things like structures within society and the way that the institutions are constructed and the way that they operate and the influence that they have on individual behavior. And that's a very sociological concept, thinking of these large outside factors and how they influence individuals. And in my opinion, as somebody who's been trained much more on the macro level, I think you get a lot more pushback because our society likes to look at people as we're individuals, we have complete freedom of choice, and they very much undermine the influence of the environment, relatively small to all the way up to international levels, and how it influences the way that individuals develop, how they perceive the world, the options that they see available to them, and the choices that they make. So we do not live in a bubble, and that we're going to be connecting today how these outside factors have had an influence on addiction and the problem that we're going through today. So I would like to have my two guests introduce themselves, please.
Hi, my name is Tracy Traut. I am a therapist here in Valparaiso. I treat people primarily leaving the culture of addiction, coming into the culture of recovery, do a lot of work with vets with PTSD and trauma work. I also am very privileged to have worked at the Moraine House here in Valparaiso for the last 14 years, where I provide group and individual services. And I also run the state monitoring programs in both West Virginia and Indiana for nurses who are recovering from addictive disorders and mental health disorders and helping them get back to work. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.
I'm Katie Moore. I'm a certified peer recovery coach, a recent graduate with my bachelor's in psychology with a concentration in mental health and addictions. I think most importantly is that I'm a recovering addict who will have 4 years clean tomorrow.
And she was a student of mine, and I love her.
Here.
She's wonderful. Yes. Yes. Okay, so to begin our conversation, there's been a lot of debate, some of it quite heated, about the role of the criminal justice system in dealing with drugs. And it's been an experiment that's been going on for at least 50 years, with the war on drugs. And I would like your thoughts, each of you, on the concept of decriminalizing drugs, the use and possession. Do you think that it's a net positive? Is it problematic, a combination? What do you feel about that idea that people have floated out?
I think the idea that substance use with addiction is an automatic punishment, I think is the problem, because automatically it takes the focus away from treatment, takes the focus away from recognizing that this is a disease and, these people are struggling and ultimately lose the choice of use. So automatically when they get placed with like a punishment, especially in like a criminal justice setting, not only are you creating barriers for them for in the future to ever being in the culture of recovery, but you're preventing them from, getting housing and basic, things in their life. So as soon as there's punishment put on, I think when you take away the focus from being from treatment, it's automatically
Mhm.
not okay, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, because we're very punishment oriented, right?
Mhm.
So if we slap you with some felonies, right? Which have long term, even when you're told you're in some kind of criminal justice program and we're going to expunge those after so much time. The work involved in somebody getting a felony expunged is a very complicated process. I'm not a lawyer, so I won't go into that here. But I think we throw everybody into a big pile. All of you, they assume everybody with a substance abuse problem is also a dealer, right? So we pile all of them in, right? And then we just mete out these punishments where we don't look at all at any other mitigating circumstances that A, may have created that problem, B, are going to continue to be a problem, and then we incarcerate because we think incarcerate solves problems. The funny thing about that is you will hear people say, well, at least if they're in jail or they're in prison, I know they're not using.
That is not true.
That's ridiculous.
Mhm,
Yes.
mhm, right?
Mhm.
So we have a very uneducated public and we have a very uneducated criminal justice system. Police departments, I believe, I don't know what the research is on this, but I've seen a couple studies where police departments have this, and it's not everywhere, but they've done these pilot studies. I don't know if either of you heard this, where there may be an arrest, like somebody gets picked up with paraphernalia, blah, blah, blah. The police officer also has some kind of mental health advocate with them. They talk to this person and they're given a choice. We can take you to treatment right now. Haha. That's another part of the problem, right? We can get you into treatment right now, or I'm going to have to take you to jail. Right?
Right.
So in places where you've got access and you can get them there, which we all realize this is a huge system, those kinds of things are working really well. But they're very small and they're very rare.
Exactly. And with our culture having embedded into it really since the founding of our nation, that we're a bunch of rugged individualists,
Mhm,
when
mhm.
we ignore all the factors that surround us and we
Mhm.
like to pretend that everybody has the same starting point, which
Yes,
Mhm.
is
yes.
any amount of study, you see that that is just nowhere near the reality of things. So you have somebody, and admittedly, people can get into problems with drugs from any socioeconomic status, any neighborhood. It can
Mhm.
happen anywhere. But in the social sciences, we deal with probabilities.
Mhm.
So the probability is less if you come from a lot of advantage, and if you come from other areas that are more challenged, the probability is higher.
Mhm.
But you're going to have people who are that miracle story, who all the odds were against them and they've accomplished just amazing things. And then on the other side, you're going to have the person who came from privilege, and how could they become the black sheep of the family
Mhm.
and shame us all by getting involved with drugs. But when we're talking about criminalization, you add on top of the folks who are coming from a more challenged background, and they've got a lot of social and economic factors that are pushing them in that direction. And then when they are released, you add on top of that a criminal record,
Mhm.
which makes it more difficult to get a mainstream job that's going to pay you a living wage. The burden that they were facing before is exponentially worse now.
Correct.
And then we
Correct.
wonder why recidivism rates are so high, not to mention that you can't punish people out of addiction.
You can't. And we talk about decriminalization, right? And punishment. So there is a hierarchy of drugs, whether we want to realize it in this culture or not, there's a hierarchy of drugs, right? So alcohol, we rarely talk about it. I go to conferences all the time. I have to take CEUs. What do we focus on? Opiates,
Mhm.
weed, marijuana, sorry, I should be specific, and sometimes stimulants. Right now, the biggest drugs of abuse that we are seeing opiate use has gone down, stimulant use has gone up, and it went way up over the pandemic. So meth is super cheap. You know, opiates aren't that cheap anymore. Meth is super cheap. Speed is super cheap. Coke is still super cheap, excuse me, but you still got the fentanyl in there. But we never look at alcohol as a drug. So we want to talk about the criminalization of that. It takes you a long time to end up in prison or in jail for alcohol related offenses.
Mhm.
You can go to prison or jail in depending on the state you're in for having too many hypodermic needles.
Yeah.
Or remember those when we all wore braces and you had those little small manila envelopes with the wax in it?
Mhm.
You can have one of those tiny envelopes with like this much meth in there, and you can go to prison for life in certain states. So even the way we're criminally prosecuting this is not the same. Socioeconomic, depending on how much money you have, the lawyer you have, and what you do for a living.
Mhm.
I have seen the disparaging ways in which we take this. I know in the programs that I've run, the difference is the crimes are the same, the punishment was not the same.
Or whether there are even charges brought.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think even if you look at like fentanyl testing strips. In Indiana, those are illegal,
Correct.
but how are you gonna make something that, I think at the end of the day, it boils down to like the stigma of addiction
Mhm.
and like treating people who do have substance use disorders somehow as they're less than, like to get rid of them, I think, and take away all their dignity, like we were saying
Mhm.
earlier, is like, we'll just throw them in prison and then we don't have to deal with the problem.
Mhm.
You know, we just put them away and we don't have to deal with the fact that this is like so many societal factors that have led them to use in the first place.
Mhm.
You know, there is no treatment there. If we can just put them away and never have to deal with it again.
Correct. You
And
should-
most people who go to prison come out at some point.
Of course.
Mhm.
And, as we've discussed in previous episodes, a family, if you go back to a family that's problematic,
Mhm.
it's going to have an influence. But think about the people that you're associating with in prison.
Mhm.
Is that going to be the nurturing, in all likelihood? Is that going to be the nurturing group of people who really provide you with the support? A lot of times people come out of prison and they're worse than they were when they went in.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it certainly is not solving any problems, but
Mm-mm.
then you look at what's one of the worst things that a politician can have hurled at them. You're being soft on crime.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's a death sentence to
yes.
anybody's political career.
As if all crime was committed only by people who had substance use disorders. That's what's inferred in that,
Mhm.
right? It's all these junkies, it's all these druggies, it's always negative, right? So all crime is not committed by everybody who has a substance use disorder.
Right.
And then the idea that somehow they're just gonna be able to like dig themselves out of the hole, you know? And
Mhm.
even if they go to jail, they go to prison, anything like that, and they come out with a felony,
Mhm.
then your chances, like you said earlier, of getting a job that is gonna provide like stable income,
Correct.
they can't sign up for Section 8 housing.
Mhm.
So where do you
Much less
expect
get a
them to go?
lease on anything.
Absolutely. Even now apartments, you can't have
Or
a
get-
misdemeanor.
Or get snapped.
Mhm.
And get SNAP, exactly,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. So you're automatically taking away all this services and help that is in place, but then expecting them to do it by themselves.
Mhm.
And you said earlier, like a lot of times, like people who use substances get grouped in with dealing, you know,
Yeah.
and a lot of times that is so separate. But even in the cases that it is similar in somebody who is dealing with substance use disorders
Mhm.
and they are dealing, which is monkeys can't sell bananas kind of thing sometimes.
Correct.
It's so then you throw them in prison for using, maybe not a dealing charge, but just say they're using, and then they get out and now they have a felony and can't get a stable job because they have this felony.
You can deal.
You can deal.
Mhm.
That's income, and that's probably more income than a job that
Mhm.
is going to accept them for having felonies for this.
Mhm.
It's like, but no, just pull yourself out of the hole.
Mhm.
Just stop.
And even for me, trying to place interns who are in recovery
Mhm.
and they're taking the courses, specializing in addictions treatment. trying to find an agency that will accept them if they've got a felony
Mhm.
or if it has been less than 7 years.
Mhm.
It
Or
is
trying to get the
really
school's
difficult.
insurance to cover that.
Yes,
The
yes,
liability insurance.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there are in some prisons treatment programs that they offer to the inmates. Certainly, it's going to be different than what you can get from a private practitioner on the outside if you've got Blue Cross Blue Shield or some other type of insurance and, cost you a copay. But how effective do you think or know that in prison or prison-based treatment programs, how effective do you think that they are?
What, you want to go?
I'll start.
Okay.
I think it really depends because I think it's hard to just like black and white saying like it is
Mhm.
effective or it isn't effective
Right.
because I think recovery is such like a highly personal thing. So I think it's still the same idea of like being forced into treatment kind of thing. Is that going to work? Does that not work? And it's like sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But when you are placed in a prison, what are the other options? What are the other options? It's like especially people who have the motivation to get out of prison, then it's like, okay, if I participate in these programs and show
Mhm.
that I'm doing good, and then it's the matter of like, okay, let's look at the staffing there. We've talked about before in prior episodes of like certifications and credentialing and licensing and all that. And it's like, at the end of the day, looking at the program and saying if like that is adequate enough care for people,
Mhm.
it's like these people who are already incarcerated have so much going against them that if they are in there for life, the chances of them truly seeking out recovery, it's like, where's the hope in that?
Mhm.
Can they find hope in that? So I think it's hard to say yes or no because it is such a highly personal process, recovery is.
Mhm.
But prison systems are automatically going to be against the people.
Right.
Yeah.
And the programs that I'm familiar with, they are very selective and therefore the inmates who are, the most well-behaved, they've had to earn their way to get there and they tend to be getting close to release time. So they're not distributed equitably
No.
either. And when I took a class on a tour of a local prison and we were in low security, this is where the folks were getting ready to be released. The cells didn't have doors on them. They couldn't leave, but they could,
Mhm.
go around through where they were. And as we're getting ready to turn a corner, I hear a voice that I recognize, but I couldn't quite place it. But then we get around the corner and it's one of my graduates who is leading a treatment group. And I know that that person had only an associate degree.
Mhm.
And, I chair a program at an associate degree granting institution. So I know that there's value in it. But to your,
Absolutely.
but to your point of,
Mhm.
is it adequate? I question that,
Mhm.
are they qualified really to be, I mean, you can't get licensed
No.
at an associate level.
And also you've put that person, great experience,
Yeah.
but who's the experienced person standing there teaching you the nuance of doing this?
Oh, he was the person standing up and all
Mhm.
the inmates were sitting down.
Mm-hmm.
It was him and them.
Mm-hmm. That's it. So you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants, right? Again, all these things tend to be manualized. So it's filling out a lot of worksheets and
Mhm.
and the ones that work are the ones where you actually have separate pods. So people are actually going in and you are building a sense of community within that.
Mhm.
And it also works well with people who are not having long sentences. They are shorter sentences, but you're at the mercy of funding. What's the state willing to pay for, the county, whatever it is. Also, a lot of those tend to be religiously affiliated, which if you are not a person that aligns with that particular religious view, which happens a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not throwing religion under the bus. I'm just saying that if you don't relate to that,
Yeah.
that's going to be a struggle for you while you're in there. So, and again, what are you connecting them to? When they leave this program, are you giving them, here's how you find AA meetings, NA meetings, smart recovery. Here's how you can go to a group to connect, right? There's no follow-up. It's like, okay, we stamped your paper. You finished this, you finished your incarceration time, now out the door.
You go now.
No resources.
Mhm.
Right. What factors do you feel contributed to the explosive rates of substance use and abuse? Not only over the 50 years that we've been talking about, but particularly over the last 20 to 25, it's really gone crazy. What do you attribute some of that to? Help us understand.
I think we're a very disconnected society. Go back to your point about individualism, right? We are not a collectivist society. We like to pretend that we're collectivist, right? And in some areas we get close to that, right? But not a lot. We depend a lot on churches and nonprofits and other groups to like take care of social problems because we want to look like we're doing the work on the social problem, but we're just kind of barely touching the thing. But I think we have become more polarized, we've become more disconnected, and we love to run things on fear. So really what has happened is like I said before, we've turned every person with a substance use disorder into a boogeyman dealer, right?
Mhm.
And we push this fear, right? Like you don't want to be near this person because, they had a problem, right? Like it's gonna rub off on you, right?
Mhm.
And then that creates more fear, suspicion, more stigma, and then everybody pushes into their own silos, right? If you're ever at a party or whatever, or social gathering, and you hear people talking about, addiction, you get one or two, there's no middle ground. It's these people are ridiculous. I used to have a shirt that said "got in a lock zone." And I used to wear that everywhere. And people would be like, I can't believe you support people, getting that drug and then going out again and getting that drug. And I just said, I don't want people to die. And I just kept walking, right? But you're going to get that attitude, or you're going to get the overblown that we need to be, like cuddling people and right. We have no middle
Yeah.
ground. And I think cell phones and the use of internet and this fear pushing and everything getting pushed to sort of just support your worldview, we are not seeing each other anymore. We're not seeing people. We are not seeing each other. We are not reaching out to help. We are just like, you got to suck it up and deal.
And we depersonalize.
Correct.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they're called junkies or
Mhm.
whatever,
Right.
and that makes them less human
Mhm.
and less deserving of
Mhm.
respect.
Correct. Or care.
Yes.
Mhm.
I think it's that like namelessness and that facelessness.
Mhm.
That like if I get put into the category of being like just an addict, or I get
Mhm.
put into a category of being a junkie, then any personality, anything that I have experienced in my life, even like positive things, any education that I have, any work that I have done, like all that automatically goes out the window because I've already been labeled as being just a junkie.
Mhm.
There's automatically like from across the country, you see it like, especially on social media and things like that, there's automatically this hatred that is pushed against different categories, and when it comes to like addiction, like you said, there's two completely polar opposite sides and somehow neither of them match
Mm-mm.
at all.
Nope.
It's like or you see anybody, they put that they're a recovering addict and it's automatically like, you're a bad person, criminal, don't deserve this, don't
Mhm.
deserve that. How could you do this? And it's like not recognizing
Mhm.
any of the like social factors that have gone into it and automatically put into a box that creates these barriers that like you can never get out of.
Correct. And we also somewhat glorify it. Back in when I used to be really active with the Porter County Substance Abuse Council, there used to be this thing where we went into schools and talked And one of the things we did was we always had somebody who was in recovery. So I covered all the, this is what happens to your brain kind of things without, this is your brain on drug stuff. And, the importance of seeking help, and your teachers are here to help. And if you don't feel safe at home, and we kind of addressed a lot of things. And then the person who was in recovery would talk, and the kids were funny because like they were dead quiet. That had a big impact on them.
Mhm.
And we always gave them like a slip of paper. So if you wanted to ask a question, but you didn't want to say it out loud, you could put it in, and you just put it in a bowl and I could pull them out. But the funny thing is that some of the kids were fascinated because what they wanted to know is, were you a dealer and how much money did you make? Right? Because that's the other myth we push,
Yeah.
right? And one of the young people who was in recovery with me, one of the things he said was, he kind of got freaked out by the question, but this is how he answered it. He said, well, it wasn't as profitable as you would think, because when you're dipping into what you're supposed to be selling, you're not making as much money. And the kid pondered this for a moment, and then he goes, that makes sense. Okay, thank you for answering. But
Yeah.
but the kids were seeking that kind of information, right? They wanted to know the questions that most adults are like, and be like, no, you can't ask that, right? And we don't give them an exposure. We say, don't do drugs, right? That's like saying don't eat paste, right?
Yep.
So we don't address that in a way that's a normal conversation. Like we say, you shouldn't drink a 6-pack of Coke every day, right? That's a normal thing to say, right? But if they're living in a house or whatever, and you'd have kids write questions like, my aunt or my dad or my whatever is doing this, right? And, how do I get help for this or whatever, right? And those are the questions that pop up. But I think the kids want the information. They want to be educated,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you say to the kid, if you get to a party and you're uncomfortable and there's a big bowl of whatever there, we as a whole society, I told all my kids' friends, you need a ride home from somewhere and call me. No questions asked. Get your fanny out of there, text me. You don't even have to call. I will come get you, right?
Mhm.
And I meant that. I only had to do it 2 times, one with each of my kids. But my point is that we don't give anybody a safety outlet. We don't want to have these conversations, right? And then on a macro level, we turn around and we're like, oh my God, we have so many social problems. How do we get here? Where are we going?
Mhm.
But we don't want to have the talk.
Well, and you talk about kids being kind of naturally interested in
Yes.
this,
Mhm.
Yes.
but we're now in another age of book banning, and you can't talk about things in school.
Nope.
You can't provide them with resources,
Mhm.
or you can get fired.
Yes.
And
Fired, sued, go to jail yourself as an
yes,
educator.
yes. And the parents who push that are the least likely to be talking to their kids about them at home as well.
Correct.
It's
Correct.
just like with sex ed.
Correct.
We don't want you teaching your values to our kid. Leave it to us, but then they don't talk to them. And that's why the pregnancy rates in those
Escalate.
families are high. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the same thing I suspect happens with substance use.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
I think by not answering like kids' natural curiosities
Mhm.
to these questions, like open them up to be like susceptible to like the glorification that we see today of like drugs and alcohol, and also the lifestyle that comes with it. That like when you're not answering these questions or sharing the reality of it or like what goes on,
Mhm.
then it just leaves them to their own imagination because the
Mhm.
people in their life are like automatically suppressing. So
Right.
it's this big mystery and this unknown
Because
thing.
what they see is like the cartel. They live in this big, rich and fancy
Exactly.
life. That's one guy.
Yeah, that is not.
It's not the
Mhm.
trickle down of all the other people that are being made to do this. And
Absolutely.
Looks like Miami Vice back in the day. Yeah.
yes, I think kids do that, right? Because that's what's in their video games. That's what's in their whatever. And look, I don't think you do your kid any favor by banning all this stuff. You got to have the conversation. They're going to go out in the world at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And they already are. And you're kind of sending people out there with no safety net, no support, and no knowledge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think the unknown is what's hurting them more.
Mhm.
The unknown,
Mhm.
not knowing or being prepared for what it looks like,
Mhm.
or providing that safety for them when they do go out on their own and figure it out.
Mhm.
It automatically makes it where an unsafe situation where they have no knowledge of it and easily fall into
Mhm.
the throes of addiction.
Mhm.
Like that's how that happens without knowledge, with this idea of like glorification with nobody there to answer any of the questions. It's this big, mysterious, like luxurious thing that I think sometimes like kids can think it is.
Well, I think the unspoken assumption is that if we don't talk about it, it won't become an issue.
Correct.
Exactly.
Right, right.
And you're
Yes.
planting the
The seed.
idea.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if you
Yeah.
think it's time to have a talk with your kids about drugs,
Mhm.
you're already too late.
Correct.
It
Yep,
should have been
correct.
before.
Right. And it also comes with giving them some autonomy. I mean, it really starts as simply with your children as if you say to them, they say, I don't feel good, right? And let's say you ask them if they want a Tylenol or an Advil or whatever it is, and they say no, don't look at them and say, no, no, you really need this, right? Now, I'm not talking about if it's an antibiotic or they've got some medication they got to be on, right?
Right.
Because what you're teaching them to do is not monitor how they feel internally. We're teaching them to not monitor that and not be aware of how they feel, right?
And solutions come from pills.
Correct. So if they say no, most of the times if the kid feels really bad, they'll circle back to a trusted adult and be like, look, I'm really feeling whatever. Teach them about it's important to be in tune with who you are. It's important to know how you physically feel. How does your tummy feel? How does your head feel? How are you feeling in this space, right? But we don't do that either. We just kind of micromanage all this. And then at one point we send you out the door and just be like, oh, have at it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'd like to do a big go back around to a topic that was brought up some time ago. And that was yours. You brought it up about social isolation.
Yes.
And for people who have not read it yet, and I believe I may have mentioned it in a previous, either in a podcast or in a class, but there's a fabulous book written by a sociologist named Robert Putnam, and it's called Bowling Alone.
Yes.
And it's just had its 25th anniversary reissue.
Mhm.
And he talks about exactly what you
Mhm.
were talking about.
Mhm.
We don't gather together
Mm-mm.
as communities anymore.
Mm-mm.
We don't know our neighbors.
Mm-mm.
We don't go to the parades and the fireworks or join bowling leagues
Mm-mm.
or and families are scattered. We live all over the country. It's not like it used to be where you could count on a relative who lived 5 minutes away to step in.
Mhm.
And when you mix in the issues you brought up about the internet and things like that, and unreliable information and how it depersonalizes people,
Yes.
it think of how powerful it would be if we could actually, or if we had to, some of the things that people would write in social media, they'd have to look you in the eye and
And
say
say it
it.
to you out loud.
Mhm.
They
Right.
wouldn't do it.
No, they wouldn't,
Mm.
because it's so easy when everybody's nameless and faceless,
That's
right?
right.
It's so easy. One of the things I've always thought would be amazing is, these community dinners and we'll keep this addiction focused. But, I've always wanted it to be like, let's have a community dinner or brunch or something. And let's put people who are in the culture of recovery and those of us who have messed up our lives in other ways, let's get us all in the same room and let's share a meal together.
Yeah.
Let's have some pancakes, that's whatever. But when you try to get those ideas going, there's no momentum because everybody freezes. They freeze. If you can only deal with people who look exactly like you are more isolated than anyone else.
And I think it goes even further because you think about the way that people respond if you call without texting.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yes.
freak out like
That's really
that
hard for
is
me,
that
as an old person, right? Who was taught that we have face-to-face conversations done.
oh
I
trying
struggled.
trying to get people to come
Uh-huh.
to class and
Right.
not be on Zoom and turn on their camera at
Right,
least
right.
so that I can
Mhm.
see your face. I'm
Mhm.
like
Yeah,
you.
yep.
I want the person's face in front of me so
Correct,
that
so
I
I can
can
see them,
connect
right.
to it.
Here's what I'm going to tell all of you who are not signing on to Zoom in class. When you have a professional license and you have to do CEUs, you have to be on camera or they won't give you your CEUs. So get yourself used to it now,
Yep.
so that when you need to get your CEUs, you can do that.
That's right.
Uh-huh. Yeah. But see,
Exactly.
we're teaching people to hide, right? Why am I not on camera? Because I don't like the way my hair looks, right? I don't like the way my shirt looks. I'm not fitting in with the rest of these people in class, whatever, right? And you never stop to realize that everyone else sitting in the class is probably thinking the same thing. Just get on camera,
Yeah.
right? Trust the person that's in front of the class that has your back. That's why they're there. Trust me, no one is teaching. No one is teaching for the salary. Trust me on this,
She
right?
just outed me for not being rich.
So, it's sort of like, guys, you got to look at this, right? And that's the part is now with all this book banning and all this other stuff. Now I have to wait for everybody to graduate from high school and hopefully go to college, right? And a lot of people aren't going to do that because then most college campuses and most environments are pretty safe places for people, right?
Yeah.
But if that's not your choice, or your option, then how are we going to get this information out? And
That's right.
yeah, and we are stuck. I totally forgotten about that book, Bowling Alone. That was 20 years ago, right? And
25.
25, and he was addressing it then, and here we are, and it's worse,
Oh, way worse.
way worse,
Yeah.
way.
He was so dead on
He
with that
was.
book.
And I remember that book getting panned too by certain
Oh,
people.
yeah.
He was horrible and he didn't know what he's talking about. And because Americans especially do not like to be criticized about how we do things.
Oh, no.
We've been doing this the same way for 250 million years, so we need to continue to do this, right? So when you look at decriminalization, to kind of circle back for a moment,
Mhm.
what does that look like and what does that mean? To me, decriminalization means it's not like we're going to let everybody run around and do whatever they want, but how are we have mandatory minimum sentencing and we still have that.
Mhm.
So how are we going to adjust that? But also, if alcohol, people make these arguments all the time. Alcohol is one of the most dangerous drugs we have,
Yes.
right? And it's on the schedule. It's all of those things, just 21 to buy it. But people who are pushing for weed, we are acting like they're pushing for the legalization of fentanyl, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into the debating of yes, no, whatever. But my point is that we do not look at drugs. Alcohol, you should not detox off of alcohol alone, ever,
Mm-mm.
ever.
Ever.
Opiates, you can make it through. It ain't,
Absolutely.
I'm not saying it's
It's not
pretty,
easy, but you can make it.
right? But we fear opiates and we love alcohol, right?
It's all social definition and
Mhm.
who's got the power.
Right. Mm-hmm. We have this huge fear of weed. We fear weed more than fentanyl right now, right? And most opiates are full of fentanyl. Like I don't even know why we call them opiates anymore, but we fear the weed more than we fear the fentanyl, more than we fear the alcohol. And I'm telling you, the age of first use in the state of Indiana for alcohol is 11. Mm-hmm. And if you have a higher concentration of a socioeconomic level in an area,
Mhm.
the earlier you're going to have the onset of use.
That's right.
Less supervision, less conversations, less exposure,
Fewer
and it's availability.
opportunities.
And you got cash in your pocket.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who don't know, Reefer Madness was not a documentary.
It sure wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
No.
If you want a good laugh
Yeah,
at
go watch that.
propaganda, watch
Right,
it. You
watch
can
it,
find it
right.
on the
Yeah.
internet, but it was not a documentary, folks.
Right.
So we don't need to be that afraid of
Right.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what can be done? Well, one thing that we didn't address, and I think it's kind of the elephant in the room, is the role that pharmaceutical companies have had in the explosion, first with OxyContin, and then it went further than that,
Mm-hmm.
where to me, we have a built-in social problem when pharmaceutical companies are run for profit and you make money by getting people to buy more pills.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do about that? Purdue Pharma had to pay a big fine but they didn't have to admit that they did anything wrong
No.
and nobody went to jail.
No,
Mhm.
They're billionaires.
correct.
So even after their big fine, they're still better off for having done it
Mhm.
financially.
Mhm.
What do we do? Solve all of our problems, Katie.
Oh, goodness. I think it goes back to the idea that, because I mean, I fully believe that they knew what they were doing.
Oh, yeah.
I think this was
100
absolutely a targeted thing. But
Absolutely.
it's still the idea that
Yes.
addicts don't deserve dignity. They're just addicts. They're not, people who are
Mhm.
suffering with substance use disorder. It's just automatically like they're a junkie. We don't care about them. This is going to get us more money because they're going to keep coming back,
Right, right.
and that idea in itself is a societal issue that needs to be fixed and isn't
Mhm.
going to be fixed just by targeting pharmaceutical companies. I think pharmaceutical companies obviously have blood on their hands
Mhm.
for the things that they have done to society. But this idea that people who struggle with substance use disorder are somehow less than, don't deserve dignity. And really, if we look at it from a societal standpoint, I think a lot of times they don't care whether they live or die. And that's just like the baseline. At the end of the day, they don't care whether somebody loses their life over this. They don't care if somebody develops an addiction or anything like that. And the lack of humanity and care and the stripped of dignity and any humanness.
Oh,
to somebody who
profits over
struggles.
people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But the
Absolutely.
way we prescribe, right? We put in pain as a fifth vital sign. And I'm not saying that pain is not a relevant thing that we need to check. But again, we are so quick here to like I had a surgeon tell me one time we have pain for a reason and we need to get to the bottom of why we have the pain, right? But if you're a doctor and you've got a bazillion patients you have to see and everybody's complaining, and you can just write a script and everybody shuts up. I think they just write the script and you roll, right?
Mhm.
And then, let's look at the whole thing that's happening with Ozempic right now, right?
Mhm.
So this is supposed to be this big weight loss thing. It's hard for the people that really need to use it for weight loss or for their diabetic issues to get it. Same things happening with Adderall because we're using that off label for other things. And we create this way in which the easiest way to lose the weight is just to take the Ozempic. I get that. It would have taken me a lot less time over the last 18 months to lose the weight I lost, but we solve everything with a pill. So we are, the pharmaceuticals, 100%, they are culpable, but we as consumers are also culpable.
Mhm.
What are we teaching our kids? What are we, there's some statistic out there that we make up 3 to 5% of the world's population, and we consume something like 97% of the world's opiates and 90% of psychotropic medications and things like that. So we're not teaching anybody to cope because we're so disconnected, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't get rid of the pain. It makes you high enough to not care that you have pain.
Right.
We need to explain that.
Absolutely. I think with any like medication like that, the idea that a pill is going to fix
Mhm.
is automatically the wrong way to come into
Right.
something,
Right.
without addressing, especially if we want to talk about pain, like without addressing like the underlying issues
Mhm.
or coping mechanisms or anything that they can do to help like alleviate that pain.
Mhm.
It's automatically just like, how many pills can we get you on?
Mhm.
And then it's like, oh, they became addicted. Who would have ever thought?
Right. Who would have ever thought?
Weird.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of responsibility that goes with the individual consumer,
Mhm.
because if you go, think about what
Mhm.
we've done with antibiotics.
Correct.
You go in and they tell you that it's a virus and people will fuss and complain.
Yes.
And if you don't give them an antibiotic,
Mhm.
they'll say, this doctor ignores me, I'll go to another doctor.
Mhm.
And again, we've got the profit motive for general
Mhm.
practitioners and all
Mhm.
sorts of doctors. They don't want to lose their patients. So some of them, in spite of knowing better, they will write the prescription for the antibiotic.
Right.
And a lot of it's happened similarly with the pain meds.
All right. And we're getting superbugs and it's a placebo effect. We all know, anybody who knows anything between bacterial and viral infections knows the antibiotic isn't going to touch the viral infection,
Right.
right? But people get to feel better because they get to feel better because it eventually goes away, right?
Mhm.
But then that's kind of like a placebo effect, right? And nobody you still hear that now. And you want to say to people, that's spiral. That's not going to help. But you just kind of be quiet, right?
Yeah, but I took the
Mhm.
pill, it went away in 7 days,
Right.
and if I wouldn't have, it would have taken a week.
Week.
Yes.
Yes, right. Exactly. Would have taken a week. Mhm. And you did nothing to your body.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right. Treat
Mhm.
me, please.
Please.
Okay, here's another one of my impossible questions that you all love.
Mhm.
If you were all powerful, you were the Wizard of Oz, and you could change society to lessen the desirability of drugs, what would you do, almighty wizard?
I would really get to work on making sure people were connected because I think the more connected we are emotionally, the safer we feel. The more safe, valued, and loved we feel, the less we're going to seek out other things to make us feel safe, valued, and loved, right? One of the most consistent things we have in this world are drugs. They are very consistent. They are very dependable. They do not let you down. They're consistent, right? And we need to be way more consistent with our connection. And I would work, and this is so altruistic, but that's what I would do. I would, start trying to push big community dinners and everybody not having to be around people that just look like them, right?
Right.
Or kind of being in these silos because I would really be out there with a little bus running around with my connection bus. Like we need to emotionally connect.
Trout's connection
Trout's
bus.
connection bus, right? There and this doesn't
Hop on
mean
board.
right that we don't have boundaries or we don't have rules, but we hide so much behind not even so much boundaries because we don't have a lot of those either, but behind rules, right? Because then that gives us the protection of not having to see somebody as the other. I really want to get rid of the concept of the other and
Yeah.
connect. We need to connect.
Yes, we do.
You miss out on so much when you are afraid to not talk to somebody, to just have a conversation, to know their experience, to share that story. You are so much broader from that experience. They don't need to be your best friend, but come on, be open to having that conversation and trying to seek understanding.
Mhm. There's a
And
silly,
treatment for everybody, Don. You need treatment, we're going to get you treatment and we're going to get you follow-up. So
There
I
you
have
go.
to add that into that.
of course, well, I asked you the impossible question,
that's
so
it.
you're giving me
Yep,
the
possible
impossible
answer.
answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And to that point, an experiment that I encourage my students to do, and I don't think very many of them do it because it would make them uncomfortable, about connectedness. I mean, we've got unwritten rules in different circumstances. And what I ask them to do, first of all, I ask them, what are the rules of etiquette on an elevator? You get on the elevator, you face the front, you look at the numbers, and you ignore everyone in the elevator,
Mhm.
and you don't even say hi or anything else. So I tell them, get in an elevator,
Mhm.
watch so that you can be the last one. You're by the door.
Mhm.
Turn around and start a conversation with the
Mhm.
people in the elevator, and you're going to see the most uncomfortable people you've ever seen.
Yes. Yeah. Because they're going to think they're going to like it, right? But they're also going to be afraid of it, right?
What's he going to do
Is
next?
he gonna, is this person crazy? Do we need a,
Doesn't he know?
mental hygiene? What do we need here,
Yes,
right?
where's the emergency
Where's the
button?
emergency button? Let me off the elevator. But that is such a great example of what I'm talking about, right? Like we don't have those experiences or, I remember being in school and you'd be talking to someone, even if it's on campus, and then the people that you normally hung out with from that class would be like, well, who's that? They'd be like, oh, somebody from my blah, blah, blah class. And then they're all like you're not supposed to talk to anybody but the people that you're
Is that all you have in
Right.
common with them?
yeah, that's it. So why are you talking to them? Like they're not part of the, they're like a social major and they're not, we always
We love social
Me
majors.
too. I was a double major, but I mean, the thing is that you can't, okay, so you're an economics major and they have to major in sociology and somebody else is in math. God, I need to know the math majors. Help me get through stats. My brain doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But we're not open. And that elevator thing is a perfect analogy. Hmm Mhm.
So now you get
You.
to be the great and
Tell us.
powerful
Uh-huh.
Oz and solve all of our problems. No
Mhm.
pressure, but
No
tell me
pressure.
now.
I think
Mhm.
if I was all powerful and could do absolutely anything, I think first taking away like social inequalities in this world,
Mhm.
like to address like poverty and housing crisis and things like that. To automatically take that away and as if they did not exist, I think probably is a good start to it. I think
Amen.
addressing
Yes.
what
Mhm.
the environment is
Mhm.
super important. And with
Mhm.
that, making everything accessible, like you
Mhm.
said, treatment accessible, mental health services
Mhm.
accessible, addiction services
Dentist.
accessible, dentists, literally anything. The amount of
Mhm.
times that you have people who can't pay a copay or anything like that
Yes.
and can't get the care that they need,
Mhm.
you know, due to the inaccessibility that we have right now in our healthcare
Yep.
system. So automatically making everything accessible, I think that in physical terms
Mhm.
to solve would be
Mhm.
super beneficial, but then in like non-physical terms, I think if I could just bring like, if I could just take away the stigma
Mhm.
of everything
Yep.
and take away the stigma that's attached to like all these different labels
Mhm.
and just strip it down to like being human,
Yes.
I think that is what I would do,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to something like addiction, like stripping away the idea of like what people even think of when they think of somebody who
Mhm.
struggles with a substance use disorder.
Mhm.
If I could just take that out of people's minds, I think we would be in a much better place than we are now.
Mhm.
Well, you two have spoiled all my fun because I was really looking forward to stumping the two of you with the impossible question, and you
right.
both did a
I
very
know.
good job with
I
it.
think we both think about it a lot,
I
probably more
do.
than anybody really
Yes.
knows.
Yeah.
Like, as you're sitting at your desk in the morning, like, what kind of change? You know, I ask
Mhm.
myself that every day. What kind of change am I going to be today?
Yeah.
Right? And even if it's not reacting to somebody who's screaming at me at the phone, and I get screamed at a lot, but you know, even if it's measuring that reaction, just letting them getting out, try to de-escalate those kinds of things. But I think if we all asked ourselves that, but I also get up in my head, you know, when I'm in the store and I'm cranky and someone starts up a conversation and I'm like, seriously, I just want to get out of here, right? Realizing when we're doing that, right?
Mhm.
Being a little more self-aware. And that's why, you know, things like this are really important. We
Mhm.
gotta get more people in here to talk about it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a great point for us to stop
Mhm.
with your example at the grocery store,
Yes.
because I can't count the number of times I've been guilty myself
Mhm.
of there's an elderly person up there and they're buying 5 things,
Mhm.
but they're telling their life story
Yes.
to the cashier.
Yes.
And
And they're writing
instead,
a check.
yeah, yes, they're writing a check.
Uh-huh.
And for those of you who don't know,
No.
checks were
Checks were things we had
you
to
would write
do.
it
We had a
down
lot of
and
things that we
people
had
would
to do
give
with
you
that.
money.
Yeah,
Yeah,
John,
yeah.
we did.
Those
Uh-huh.
don't exist anymore,
No.
hardly,
Uh-huh.
but they take a long time to process.
Mhm.
And instead of having some empathy and saying, this is clearly a lonely person who needs a connection,
Mhm.
and they need it so much that they are reaching out like that
Mhm.
to a complete stranger,
Mhm.
I get impatient and say, will you just go? Can't you go to the grocery store on senior day? Get out of my way.
Why can't you just use a debit card?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're all guilty of
We
it
are.
to varying
Absolutely.
degrees,
Mm-hmm.
and it does have a cumulative effect.
Mm-hmm.
So we all need to be more conscious and be willing to be, to a healthy degree,
Yes.
self-critical.
Correct.
And say,
Correct.
what's the consequence of that rude look that I gave that person? Or,
Right.
I sighed loudly when the person was taking a little too long.
Right.
You know,
Right.
those, if we all
Uh-huh.
did just tiny things like that,
Yes.
it would make a tremendous difference.
would.
It doesn't have to be the Wizard of Oz.
No.
Yeah.
And I had 2 Wizards of Oz here.
Thank you.
So imagine if you've got
Right.
none, but we can, in very small doses, if we all did something, we
Mhm.
could make a big change.
Mm.
So I would encourage those who are watching, think about what you can do today
Mhm.
to make the world a more friendly, welcoming, accepting place.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, thank you both
Thank you.
again for another fabulous discussion. I appreciate the two of you more than you know.
Mutual.
Mutual, absolutely.
Mhm.
And for those of you who have enjoyed the podcast, I encourage you, consider looking into human services. We've got a great program here.
Mhm.
You can email me directly at dspears18@ivytech.edu, or you can go to the college's website, and that is ivytech.edu/human services, and then you can select your nearest campus. I'm at the Valparaiso campus, so I hope you select the Valparaiso campus when you do the drop down. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it, and keep tuning in, and please like and follow and forward and all that so that we can have the greatest reach that we possibly can. Thank you all for watching.